welcome back to the Mouthing Off with Mike Spooky Season series. And unfortunately, I was a few days late, but we are back, and we are back with episode 4 of the Spooky Season series. And on this episode, we are going to dive into some of the spookier, more intense characters throughout wrestling's history. We're going to touch on the resident Extreme Rules vampire from the ECW revival on Sci-Fi. We're talking Kevin Thorn and Ariel. Then we're going to follow up and we're going to head on over to the land of Impact Wrestling, where we are going to talk about Decay, both variations of the group. And of course, I can't talk about Decay without talking about the monster, Abyss. And finishing off this episode of the Spooky Season series, you know it, you love them, Karrion, Kross, and Scarlett. So sit back, relax, and let's go ahead and get spooky on the Mouthing Off with Mike Wrestling Podcast. We are back. Welcome in. I am your host of Mouthing Off with Mike Wrestling Podcast, Mike. Make sure you give me a follow on the social medias at MOWM_podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring that bell so you get updated on my next video, and let's get into this episode of the Spooky Season series. Now, you heard me say it in the intro. We're going to start off slow. We're going to work you guys into it. We're going to get you there, and we're going to ramp up the discussion as we go. So starting off with the first spooky characters of the group here, Kevin Thorn and Ariel. Now, Kevin Thorn originally debuted in WWE in the early 2000s, around 2004, as a religious, saying prayers, dressing up in all white, had the blonde hair, the long white trench coat, as Mordecai. And Mordecai would say prayers and curse people for their sins. It did not stick. And thus, in turn, Kevin Thorn was born. Now, Kevin Thorn debuted in 2006 when ECW returned to the airwaves on the Sci-Fi channel. Now, Kevin Thorn, he would be built up with numerous backstage pre-taped video promos, vignettes, and he would just be back there spitting blood. He was a vampire, full on and full through. Now, when he debuted, he was joined by Ariel, his vampire wife, mistress, fill in the blank, his valet. Both of them would have a very, very short run in WWE and in ECW. Ariel was later released about a year later in 2007, and Kevin Thorn was on his own. Kevin Thorn, it really never hit, but for the conversation and for the spooky season, we gotta talk about it. Kevin Thorn and Ariel, the vampire darlings of ECW, they were pretty scary. I mean, as a kid watching it, I definitely was disturbed by some of the things I saw. You know, spitting up blood, had the whole vampire fangs thing going on. And then, of course, you know, after the match, they were basically dry hump. So, interesting gimmick. And no wonder, you know, it really didn't take off within ECW and WWE. He had a couple of good feuds. You know, when the New Breed group had formed, he had a feud with CM Punk, Stevie Richards. There was a couple interesting feuds, but nothing to write home about. Next up here, we're going to get into a conversation about Decay and the monster Abyss. So don't go anywhere. Now, growing up, I was a massive fan of TNA, Total Nonstop Action, now known as Impact, formerly known as GFW, Global Force Wrestling. Impact has come through the years and had a lot of different name changes and variations of it. But one man truly stood the test of time through all of those different variations of the company. That man, the monster, Abyss. And when I tell you something, that as a kid watching, to be honest, I gravitated more to TNA than I did WWE. And that is the truth. I watched way more TNA on Spike TV than I did maybe of like Monday Night Raw and SmackDown in my childhood. And Impact Wrestling TNA was honestly my go-to. And there was one man that was always consistent, always terrifying, no matter who he feuded with, the Monster Abyss. And we know Abyss, he's now in WWE, behind the scenes, producer, creative role, and honestly, chef's kiss, great acquisition by WWE at the time to get Abyss into the fold with creative producing, because he has produced some really good stuff in WWE. But I want to talk a little bit more about the intensity that Abyss exhibited. Now, Abyss debuted with Impact TNA Wrestling. He was there from pretty much day one till when he left the company and became a producer with WWE, which was around 2018. He was inducted into the Impact Hall of Fame. He was a Grand Slam champion. He held every major title in TNA's history. And that is why Abyss gets a spot on the Spooky Season series. I mean, at a time in professional wrestling, you know, the early 2000s, where The Undertaker and Kane were dominating in WWE, Abyss just brought something completely different. You know, he had the mask, but he was like deranged. And going back, he was paired with James Mitchell. And James Mitchell himself was a spooky character in his time. But the pairing of the two really worked because he was able to rein in an Abyss and, you know, the mentally deranged doings of Abyss. We got the Monsters Ball match in part to Abyss. And Abyss would go out there and have these hardcore matches with the likes of some of your favorites, AJ Styles, Jeff Hardy, the list goes on and on. But man, was Abyss one of the most terrifying characters in TNA Impact Wrestling's history. And following up, Abyss, in the 2010s, I believe it was like 2015, 2016, he would go ahead and join the group Decay, which was with Rosemary and Crazy Steve. Now, we did get the infamous Delete or Decay match, which saw the Hardys, the Broken Hardys, yes, take on the Decay at the Hardy compound. And this was such a fun match between all of the teams involved, the Hardys, Abyss, Decay, Crazy Steve, Rosemary. It was honestly super fun. And that really goes into and follows up with some additional spooky characters in Impact's history. Rosemary, awesome. Crazy Steve, really crazy. And honestly, it worked very well in Impact Wrestling. He recently came back to the company, and then there was a different variation of Decay following the version once Abyss left. They filled that spot with Black Taurus and Havoc. So Decay was still a thing up till, you know, a couple years ago. Now Crazy Steve, Rosemary, and Havoc are all kind of doing their own things in Impact. Crazy Steve, the most recent to return to Impact here as of 2023. So awesome stuff. Impact always had a way of bringing characters together and making really fun groups and factions. Decay was one of them, especially the version with Abyss. Abyss, one of my all-time favorites to ever do it. That's why we're talking about them on the Spooky Season series. Next up, you don't want to miss this one because TikTok. We are back on the Spooky Season series, and we are talking our last spooky character / characters, that being the man himself, Mr. TikTok, Karrion, Kross, and Scarlett. Now, we'll get to Scarlett in a minute, but I want to talk about Karrion Kross, formerly known as Killer Kross, formerly known as the White Rabbit. Now, Karrion Kross has had some different names, but the character, for the most part, stays the same. He's intense, he's vicious, he's brutal, and he psychologically toys with his opponents. We'll start off with the Lucha Underground inception of Kross, the White Rabbit, a group where former WWE superstar Paul London was involved in. Now, Paul London, it would have seemed to be he was the leader of this faction, but that actually was Kross, the White Rabbit. with some very intense background segments. And if you watch Lucha Underground, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The White Rabbit would actually go on to have hits placed on people, and he would tell Paul London that this person needed to die. Intense, absolutely wild. Karrion Kross would then go over to a couple different wrestling companies, but most notably Impact, where he would bring up the moniker of Killer Kross. Once again, another deranged, vicious, very physical, psychological character from Kross, and he would do wonders in his time in Impact. But the character of Karrion Kross, TikTok, would really start to take off and hit its absolute peak in WWE's NXT. Now, Karrion Kross has been one of my faves for a long time. I first discovered him with Lucha Underground, followed his career to Impact Wrestling, followed his career to WWE with NXT. Then, of course, his initial run in WWE did not go as according to plan after the creative really just screwed his character up. Had him wearing a gladiator suit, hated it. I wanted the old, vicious, psychological, he's going to toy with you. He's going to take something of you away as he breaks you down physically, but also mentally. And he returned to WWE in 2022, and he returned and immediately attacked Drew McIntyre. Now, getting back to his NXT days, it was fantastic. And that is really when I fell in love with this character from Kross. He was paired with his wife, Scarlett, and Scarlett added something just perfect to it. Dare I say, at points, Scarlett would sometimes steal the show from Kross with how she would portray the character of kind of like his soothsayer as his tarot card reader. We saw the tarot card readings in NXT. Of course, we saw the hourglass, when it would be placed, when time was coming. Time's up, of course. Got my Karrion Kross shirt on. Just goes to show you how much of a supporter and a fan I am. So I'm a little bit biased here, but Karrion Kross, man, the presentation initially when he came to NXT was chef's kiss, was money. He had Scarlett come out. The fog would come, fall and pray, the theme song. Scarlett would lead to the ring. Kross would then make his entrance from, between her legs, and then the lights would change, and it was all in black and white. And honestly, man, as I'm talking about it, I'll flash the clip. Gotta watch with the old copyright claims from WWE, but I'll make sure that you guys can check out the entrance of Kross and Scarlett, because they are fantastic together. Psychological games, check. Physicality, check. Overall, scary and intimidating character, check. Checks all the boxes for the Spooky Season series. Now, of course, Scarlett, gotta mention Scarlett, herself and Shotzi have a really great show on YouTube with the WWE YouTube, Shotzi and Scarlett's House of Horrors. So they go around and they go to the haunted places, or across the country, and they do basically like ghost adventures, kind of format. Kross has been on it as a guest. I think the newest episode has Drew McIntyre on as a guest. I checked out the first few episodes. I absolutely loved it. It's a great series. Check it out on WWE's YouTube. But that just reinforces the spooky characters that are Karrion Kross and Scarlett. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching episode 4 of the Spooky Season series. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to this video. And tell me, out of the characters that we talked about, who do you think the spookiest or the scariest is? Make sure you leave that comment down below. Make sure you follow me on social media at MOWM_podcast. And be on the lookout for my weekly recap shows for both WWE and AEW. Now, last week, I had a lot going on, and I just could not get the time to record my AEW thoughts. So this week, I'm promising you, my AEW fans, my wrestling fans, you will have the Spooky Season series. You will have Are You Not Sports Entertained, my WWE recap show. And of course, you will have Mouthing Off with Mike is All Elite. So I'll cover everything this week. Stay on the lookout. Those episodes should drop Saturday morningly according, and then Sunday morning according. Of course, this week we also have Bound for Glory with Impact. Make sure you check it out. It's going to be a fun show. You never know if a certain Chicago-made punk will make an appearance due to it being in Chicago. But from your host here at the Mouthing Off with Mike Wrestling Podcast and the Spooky Season series, make sure you go out there, enjoy some good old pro wrestling, and stay spooky.
Mouthing off with Mike, mouthing off with Mike, mouthing off with Mike, mouthing off with Mike, mouthing